Okay, so we originally planned this as a fireside chat, so there's really very little structure to it, and we would like to have as much input as possible. We have been thinking about the role of open source and encryption around journalism and human rights work, and we thought that having a Freedom of the Press Foundation, the Committee for the Protection of Journalists, and Benetech could be a good mix for us to better understand how to move toward a world where encryption is it's of better use and at the service of journalists and human rights defenders. So that's kind of where this panel is coming from. I will tell you a little bit of why I'm here, perhaps. Sounds good? Yeah, maybe we can do all the same. So I am Enrique Piraces. I lead the human rights program at Benetech. Benetech is a non-profit technology company based in the Silicon Valley, wherever that is from here, that has been providing free and open source information management and encryption technology for the global human rights movement. We are increasingly interested in supporting journalists, mostly because they overlap with human rights defenders. For example, there are another civil society group that struggles for accountability, transparency, and justice. It's also a group that is under tremendous pressures from governments and organized crime. And probably most importantly is that they are, in the same way that human rights practitioners are, they are tasked with collecting and storing information of some of the people, of some of the most vulnerable populations out there. So we think that it is important for us to contribute to that work. Just as a bit of background, Benetech has been working around for like 20 years, and it's mostly around an open source end-to-end crypto tool. So our perspective of this is mostly about providing, strong crypto, what Edward Snowden would call, properly implemented strong crypto. And we think that strong crypto should be, as well as open source, should be considered kind of like the baseline of human rights and journalistic work, mostly because of the reasons that people like Edward Snowden and Schneider have shared with us in the context of the most recent revelations and surveillance. So that's a little bit of why I'm here, and it's definitely, for me, very exciting to be next to both Trevor and Joe, not only because of the organizations that they work with, but because of the approach that they have been pursuing around some of these issues. So I'll pass it to you.
So hi, my name is Trevor Tim. I'm the director of Freedom of the Press Foundation. We're a relatively new organization, and our general goal is to support and defend journalism organizations that are dedicated to transparency and accountability. And on our board of directors are the NSA reporters, for example, Laura Butchers and Glenn Greenwald, and actually we recently named Edward Snowden as well. And I think no story has better exemplified the fact that digital security is not just a privacy issue anymore. It's directly related to press freedom. It's actually one of the most pressing press freedom battles that we're going to have over the next few decades. We really started our organization to highlight the fact that the crackdown on sources and whistleblowers is actually a direct attack on journalism. And you can see in the way that the Obama administration has approached prosecuting sources is that they really decided to actually go after the communications. So in a majority of the cases, you'll see that they subpoenaed email providers, third-party email providers, and third-party phone call providers, basically circumventing the way that they would have gone after sources for decades, which is to get journalists to testify in court against them. Since the 1970s, journalists have been banding together and basically violating court orders and going to jail instead of giving up their sources. When the prosecutors figured out 6 or 8 years ago that they didn't need to start calling reporters to testify anymore. They had easier ways to do it. So they figured out that they could move their investigations over to the initial conversations rather than after the fact in court. And so now I think journalists are starting to realize that they have to respond by doing the same thing, and that requires them to protect their sources through encryption in a lot of cases, and using technology, not just the law. And so we have been crowdfunding for a variety of encryption tools, many of which are some of the most popular that many of you have heard of, like Tor, Redphone and TextSecure, the Leap Encryption Access Project, and the winner of the award last night, which I was really happy to see, Tails, the operating system that runs off of the USB stick that so many of the NSA reporters now rely on for their work. We also run the Secure Drop open source whistleblower submission system. This was one of the last projects that Aaron Schwartz worked on before he tragically died last year. And we have been busy in the last 6 months upgrading and making it easier to use and helping journalists and organizations install it. And so we can talk about that a little later and why we think it's important, what problems it solves, what problems we still need to solve, and how we go from there.
Hi, I'm Jeff King. I'm the Internet Advocacy Coordinator of the Committee to Protect Journalists, which has been around since 1981. We are an organization dedicated to protecting journalists worldwide, whether they are surveilled, censored, harassed, kidnapped, murdered. We advocate around these issues. I also teach privacy in the digital age and media and social change at UC Berkeley, and prior to coming to CPJ, was a constitutional litigator, working primarily on First and Fourth Amendment issues. And what I'd like to talk about today is really the need for ubiquitous adoption of encryption by journalists and by the public at large. I think that Enrique and Trevor actually covered a lot of ground that I would agree with. I would primarily add that journalists need to be using these tools, whether they are covering the state fair in Iowa for a small paper or the affairs of nation states. I recently wrote a piece about the National Security Agency and in particular its storage capabilities that is vastly expanding, which adds a sort of level of unpredictability to the future in terms of how data that's being generated now will be used, whether it will be data mined, if content's being stored, and so forth. And so really there's a window of opportunity, I think, for the tech community developers to work with journalists and NGOs and academics and legal scholars and user interface designers and marketing people to build these tools, build them better, make them easier to use, and make sure they get in the hands of everybody, because you never know really when you can stumble across something that will become of interest to the NSA, the FBI, the mafia, the corporation that you're covering. There are a variety of threat models out there, and I just want to stress that anybody covering anything needs to be thinking about their sources. It's just too easy to uncover sources via these means of surveillance.
So one thing about format, given that you are the bravest of all because you're here so early, feel free to interrupt us, bring anything that you want us to address. So let's not wait until the end.
There's a microphone right there.
Yeah, there's one microphone right there. It's also, you can just shout. But perhaps, so I have the sense that the need for encryption is relatively clear among this community, like among the people that is attending RightsCon. And I tend to think that it's because the recent revelations of surveillance, among other things, have allowed us to understand that data can be collected not just today, it could be relevant over time, as you were just saying. And I would love to find some disagreement on that, but my sense is that we are all on the same plate. We may differ in terms of if encryption should be something that should be used by everyone, should be used all the time. If encryption, for example, should be something that will be flagging you in a negative way. But before we discuss that bit of that, there's this other bit that I don't think we have sufficiently discussed, and it somehow permeates this community, and it's the idea of open technology. And I'm not arguing necessarily in the context of free technology. I don't want to go to that technopolitical debate. But my sense is that some of the projects that are advocating for strong crypto are relying on open technology, like Secure, like Marcus, like a few others. And there's very little conversation about openness beyond encryption, which is, and again, another debate that I find to be quite straightforward. You can trust open encryption because someone has to do it, right? But there's the bigger picture, the one that is not necessarily or exclusively about encryption, is it's about the correlation between openness and trustworthiness. Journalists and human rights defenders are, in a way, are trusted with someone else's information after a very brief exchange. Someone will trust them either because of the role that they play in society, the institution that is behind them. And I found that, or maybe I have not heard, a sufficiently strong argument or call for us to rely on open source technology as a way to increase, the trust in some of these communities beyond encryption itself. And this is something that could permeate, like why you should use Thunderbird, versus I don't know what the other provider maybe today, Outlook is one thing. So I don't know how you guys feel about that bit, and I would really, really like to understand what's in perspective of the openness of technology.
Well, I think any debate over open source versus proprietary software was kind of settled by the NSA revelations, especially in I think you're talking about more broadly than just encryption tools, but I think the same principle generally applies. There has been a variety of reviews written about various mobile end-to-end encryption text apps in the last few months, and reviewers have just stopped even looking at proprietary tools because it's so hard for people to trust them. The biggest story to come out of the NSA revelations was the story in the New York Times, the first one they did about the NSA trying to break all types of encryption, and they have a variety of ways of doing it. They are either bribing companies to hand over their keys. They are, leaning on them or threatening them with legal orders. We saw the Logbit situation where the FBI actually got a warrant for their SSL keys. And the New York Times story even suggested that they were covertly placing agents inside companies to mess with their standards, without the company's knowledge. And so I think all of this lends to the conclusion that for something to be even remotely trusted, it has to be open source. And even then, there's still a lot of argument to be had. But the case for open source software in general, I don't think has ever been stronger.
So, first off, was it a warrant, or was it I think it was a 2703D order, right? Wasn't it?
There was a variety of steps that ended in a warrant.
Okay. I will play devil's advocate a little bit. Primarily on I completely agree with what you do. But I think, speaking from a practical standpoint, I would like to see more people using encryption, even if it's commercial proprietary encryption, if it's somebody turning on File Vault, rather than downloading TrueCrypt and learning it, if the alternative is then not using encryption, with the caveat that, and Eva Galperin and Jillian Moore at the BFF wrote a very good piece about this recently, it depends on your threat model, right? So if your threat model is the NSA, as Bruce Shire has said, that's an uphill battle anyway. Now there are people, including people at this conference, people who are on the board of Trevor's organization, for whom that is true. The NSA is their maybe primary threat model right now. But there are plenty of examples of other threats to journalists, and frankly, if they're sitting at a cafe and their laptop gets swiped right out from under their nose, while they're writing a sensitive story, I would still rather that be encrypted with commercial software than not encrypted at all. That said, obviously, that's a right. The trustworthiness factor is a major consideration when it comes to choosing open source technologies.
So, I think you're bringing up a strong point. I think so no effort is too zero in that sense. People need to do it as much as possible. So I think that you're right in terms of like putting proprietary software, making a space for proprietary software as long as people are involved with security. And perhaps one of the things that this is hinting at is, the challenges of adopting open source. Why is some of these proprietary software so much better for those users than open source? And I know that you're interested in talking about usability. I mean, we just went through, the ethical implications of open source encryption a little bit, but there's this big challenge, about usability. A large number of the open source applications out there that provide encryption are just very difficult to use. They add a lot of overhead for some of our users. Do you want to speak a little bit?
Sure. I think that one of the most disruptive things that could happen would be to increase the usability and ubiquitousness of these tools. I know there have been other discussions about this, but I come from a legal background. I know enough, but I don't take that deep dive into code like a lot of people who are at this conference. And so for me, it's a very practical question of knowing my constituents and knowing the risks, getting people up to a basic level that's going to protect them, and probably protect them pretty well, depending on who it is that's angry at them. And journalists make lots of people angry because they tell the truth, and they tell the truth to power. That's their job. And through no fault of their own, find themselves very much at risk from a variety of sources. I just want to stress that. But I think that one of the most interesting and sort of again, disruptive or radical things that has happened in the encryption world or in the communications world is Tor is now a browser bundle. You download it like Chrome and Firefox, and that's huge. That's huge. It means people can actually just download it and use it instead of having to configure software, configure the Firefox browser itself. And I think that with regard to other technologies, that would be a very good next step, is to start making things easier to use. I didn't bring up UI designers by accident. I didn't bring up marketers by accident. I mean, we should make these things easy. We should make them cool and get people using them as broadly as possible. Partly because it creates network externality. Sorry, I just wanted to real quick and say, if you're going to get flagged because you use some Tor, for example, or using other forms of encryption, we know that the NSA keeps that information indefinitely, but the more people start using these tools, the, I suppose, less interesting it becomes that people are using them.
Yeah, so I think we're not going to find any disagreements within this audience about that these tools need to be more usable and more ubiquitous, but I think I'm more interested in why they're not more usable and more ubiquitous. And I welcome any comments from the audience about this. I think we can look at a great example. A recent example that's been in the news is WhatsApp, which was just purchased by Facebook for $19 billion or whatever. They have 50 employees at WhatsApp. 40 of them are engineers, and their application has one purpose: to provide an easy way for people to text message back and forth around the world. And when you look at the people that they are hiring, they are professional developers. They're paying them probably anywhere from $100,000 to $250,000. They are trained in creating applications that are easy for 6-year-olds to use. And when you look at encryption apps, it's an entirely different culture, an entirely different skill set that people use when people that are interested in creating them to begin with. Number one, we have a business problem where there isn't as big of a market for something like this. There aren't end-to-end encrypted apps being sold to Facebook for billions of dollars because part of these large corporations' business model includes being able to sell advertising, personalized advertising, and that just doesn't mesh with end-to-end encrypted technology because they will never be able to read the messages. So WhatsApp has 40 engineers working for them. TextSecure, which is obviously widely considered to be the best end-to-end encrypted application that's headed by Moxie Marlinspike. They have 2 people working on their Android app. They're trying to create an iOS app right now. They have another 2 people working on that, only part-time. And there probably is a very slim chance that they're going to sell their company to Facebook for $20 billion. They can't pay their engineers hardly half as what these companies that are being invested in by Silicon Valley venture capitalists. So they're at a huge disadvantage to getting the type of talent they need. And not only that, but the type of people who are interested in building these apps are usually cryptographers or hackers, people who have sysadmin backgrounds who are really interested in security, but don't necessarily think about usability because they've been steeped in this type of technology forever, and they take it as second nature to them, but don't understand that regular people, non-technical people can't understand it. So there are various barriers that I think these types of tools need to get over to really reach the masses in a way that could make a huge difference. I mean, in some countries, if you're using Tor, your IP address can be flagged. They can't see what you're doing over Tor, but if they have access to the entire network, they can see the IP addresses that actually connect to it. This is a huge problem when not a lot of people are connecting to Tor, so they can pick everybody out. But if there are millions of people using it, for example, then that problem slowly disappears. But again, you'll see this problem over and over again with any encryption tool, and there just aren't easy solutions unless we can get a lot more money, a lot more talent, and a lot more development skills going to usability. I think this problem has become more prevalent in the last year or so, and it's really become clear that usability is actually a security issue. And if things aren't usable, then they're easy to break, they're hard to use, and people will eventually fail. And so the quicker everyone realizes that, I think the better.
So, yeah, I mean, again, hard disagreement, but I think it's a very strong point. Usability should be understood as a security feature. It should be safe in the numbers, and one click is one click too many. Paraphrasing what Krishna said. And I think it's interesting that in this venue we talk a little bit about funding business models and the challenges for this, not just the creation but also the adoption. And if you guys could talk a little bit about that, I am also particularly interested in hearing more about the approach that you're following for the adoption of secure drop among institutionalized media, given not just the role that they play in the field from an ethical perspective or a practical perspective, but also given that their nature is different. They are in a position to potentially inject resources into some of the field. They're in a different position than freelancers, and there may be something that the rest of us can learn from their business model than something like secure drop will fall over the next years.
Sure. So, I guess I can give a little background on SecureDrop first. SecureDrop was originally created by Aaron Schwartz, and about a year before he died, with Kevin Paulson, who's actually here in the audience today, the Wired Investigations Editor. And its basic premise is to combine a bunch of tools that we know work into a much more usable format. So right now what it looks like is we are combining the use of Tor, the use of GPG encryption, and the use of Tails, the operating system, when we were last night. And essentially our goal is to lower the barrier for sources who want to submit documents to journalists but don't have a way of doing it. Email, even if you're using encryption, the metadata could lead back to your email address. If you've ever tried to get a truly anonymous email address in the past couple of years, it's close to impossible. But, if you want a Gmail address, you need to either have another phone number or another email address. So if you want another phone number, you have to go to the store, pay cash to get a burner phone. To activate that burner phone, you need another phone number. So where are you going to get that phone number? Are you going to go to a payphone Or are you going to use one of your friend's phones? And then when you finally get that, you have to go to a coffee shop that you're not familiar with, sign up for that email address, and then make sure that you never ever sign up to that email address again from any other internet connection that could be associated with you. So it's really, really hard. And mistakes can be made. And so Secure Drop really tries to lower these problems. Another huge problem Secure Drop goes after is this third-party problem that I mentioned before. You know, the prosecutors figured out that they can subpoena third-party email providers for journalists or sources' emails, and the journalists won't find out until after. So Secure Drop takes away the third party completely. The Secure Drop servers sit in the journalists', we actually recommend their general counsel's office at this point, and the source is logging in through a web application, so there is no third party to be subpoenaed. They can only go to the journalism organization if they want any type of data, and prosecutors are loath to do this. They will avoid this at all costs, and even very, very rare times they do, they're faced with a 2-3 year long legal battle. And then, so the final problem we try to solve is the metadata problem, which is, you know, there are, in all of these cases, you will see that they will try to figure out who these sources are talking to through the metadata in their emails. And so we try to log as little metadata as possible, and the metadata that we do log is deleted regularly. So even at the end of this giant legal battle, hopefully there will be nothing for prosecutors to get. And so that's basically the idea behind this is that we're trying to solve the problems that have cropped up in the past decade because of all of this digital surveillance. But the problem that we're always facing is that, as we've been talking about, security is hard. You know, we can make it easier for the source, but then we also have to train the journalists on how to use Tails, how to use GPG. And so, you know, we've taken the approach is that we want to take all of the pain out of this for media organizations as possible. So we will actually go there physically on site to help them install Secure Drop. After we install it, we will sit there and train their journalists in how to use it, and then come back regularly to make sure that they're doing everything proper. You know, we kind of look at Secure Drop as a gateway drug to digital security because it uses all of these tools that you can use more broadly, and it forces journalists to learn how to use them, and then hopefully they can spread this knowledge more organization-wide. And so right now we have, I think, 5 or 6 active deployments, including the New Yorker, Forbes, The Intercept, Glenn Greenwald's new publication, ProPublica, and Kevin Paulson has his own personal Secure Drop. We just went to 3 major media organizations in the last 3 weeks. They haven't announced theirs yet, and so I'm afraid I can't say their names, but they are some of the biggest papers in the country. And so we hope that by taking the pain out of this process, we can help them fight back in at least a little bit, in a little way, given that you know, they're facing unbelievable investigations on the source side. I mean, there are 2 New York Times reporters who every single person they've emailed in the White House is under investigation, is under leak investigation. And so obviously, you know, 90% of these people probably have never given any sensitive information to a reporter, but that means that they have to spend thousands of dollars on a lawyer, their job is in jeopardy, if they say something wrong, they slip up, they can be charged with lying to investigators. So it just creates this giant chill in the air for journalists who are just trying to do their job. Even though it's not a crime to talk to reporters, it's kind of turned into one. And so we hope Secure Drop can at least help sources start to contact journalists in different ways and think about security in a way that is as safe and secure as we can make it.
So I would want to add just a couple points about why technologies such as Secure Drop and similar technologies are so important. The first would be that it's not just the current environment that we're talking about. And it's not just email metadata and many of the other traditional ways in which journalists and sources communicate digitally, but there are also issues of location tracking, facial recognition technology. There are a myriad of ways of tracking people through space and through virtual space that will just become more and more prevalent. Of course, in the US, the courts are struggling with these issues. But we're also not just talking about the US. These technologies, surveillance technologies, will become cheaper, they'll become more widespread, and they will be in the hands of many, many other actors other than just the US government. So at this point, that's already happening, but we have to think about sort of the overall environment, particularly in terms of other forms of surveillance. So you can't just go meet with your source. I call the conversation a computer crime class I had with Jennifer Granick and Richard Salgado in law school, and there was the point was made that at the time of the founding of this country, in some ways you had more privacy because you could go have a quiet walk in a field somewhere, right? Thomas Jefferson had a friend who created a cipher that I think 2009, I think it was broken, using supercomputers. I mean, it was more opportunities through just the lack of these technological tools to have private conversations in some respects. And now you could be tracked into that field. There could be a tiny recording device, or they could have one of those spy movie parabolic microphones, which is one. And the other point I want to make is that as much as I talk about usability being important, journalists really do have a duty to learn these things. It is part of the job now. If you want to protect your sources, you have to put in the effort. And so I'm very grateful for the efforts of Trevor and many other developers who work on these things and who are proselytizing it. But it also said there is an onus on journalists to engage with these technologies.
Just to go off the point you just mentioned about, journalists may have felt that they could have had more privacy in the past, where they could meet somebody in a field or a parking garage, or that sources felt that they could mail documents. Another example of how surveillance has really exploded. Probably the most underrated story that came out of the Snowden revelations, actually wasn't even a Snowden revelation at all, it's something the New York Times picked up on, which is the US Postal Service is taking a photo of every single package that goes through their system, and outside of the package, so they can see the person's handwriting, they can see where it's going, and if they put a return address, they can see where it is. So if you want to mail a package to a reporter, it is much harder to avoid surveillance than you may think. So you have to be worried now about the handwriting of the package, whether you're putting a return address. You have to, if you go to the post office, they take a picture of every single person that walks into the post office to mail something, so you can't go into the post office. You have to make sure your fingerprints aren't on the package. So that one of the first leak convictions, a guy named Samuel Morrison in the 1980s, because part of the reason he was convicted was because the journalism organization handed over photographs that he had allegedly gave them with his fingerprints on them. So you have to be worried about that. You can't obviously mail it from your home mailbox because they can trace it back to you. So you have to go to a public location, hopefully not anywhere near where you regularly visit, avoid surveillance cameras on the way. And once you do all this, put it in the mail, and you'll have no way of then communicating with the reporter whether they ever received it, whether they have questions, and if they can do anything about it. So it's very hard, no matter what medium you're using to communicate, to completely avoid surveillance or potentially the ire of investigators after the fact. And so I think, a lot of people come to us and say, well, mailing may be safer than secure drop-off. It depends, and in many cases it may not be. So this is all things that sources and journalists have to be aware of now that they may not have had to before.
We have a couple of issues first, actually. I know you mentioned thinking of Secure Drop as sort of a gateway drug towards being secure online, and I also know earlier in the talk you were speaking about how you want everybody, marketing, usability, etc. How would you say the best way is for young people, I'm talking like junior high and high schoolers, doing their first ever campus paper, whatever it is, to start to think about these issues, because those habits that they found when they're not a profession are going to be their sort of default habits. What would be your best use case scenario for somebody in their teenage years to become a secure digital citizen who might ever be a citizen journalist?
Can I take a quick step and then pass it to you guys for the other questions? So I would say that it would be important, especially for for younger than us, not to think of the tools themselves, but to think of the problem and to think of the ethical things that lie behind the management of sources or the information of other populations. So technology evolves rapidly, both the threat and open source, internet software, if you want to call it like that, will go advance. So what you would be seeing over time would be very different from what we see today. I would say that if you are working on a newspaper, as I did when I was a kid, I think that probably the most important thing would to play the exercise of managing the information about your sources with extreme caution, and not about using a specific tool. It's more of an ethical exercise than a technical one at the moment of formation.
I think the first thing that anybody needs to do is be aware of what's happening. I mean, we've seen a sea change in the way people view privacy ever since the Edward Snowden revelations, partially because they just didn't know what was going on. I mean, I think a lot of people have said that people didn't care in the past, but I think it just wasn't in their purview, and so they had an easy way to ignore it, and now they don't. People say that younger people don't care about their privacy as much, but there's been 2 recent studies that showed actually when you look at they're much more conscious of the privacy settings on social media than older adults are, and actually restrict information more. And we've seen this the way that they have been moving to applications like Snapchat that will delete their messages as soon as they send them. And so I think young people are actually aware of this issue, at least in the general sense, because their natural instinct is to want privacy, despite the fact that they're always online, always posting things publicly. And so it's just the way to get young people involved is to make these products more accessible to people who haven't necessarily thought about the need for end-to-end encryption or even know what it potentially is. And that goes back to the problems we were discussing before, I think.
So I just realized that our panel should end like in 8 minutes or so. So maybe we should just take, that's what the program says, right? Unless I have a different program.
Yeah.
You were about to ask something, maybe?
Yeah, I hate it when people say they have quick questions, but I have 2 quick questions and a long one. And you said this is a fireside chat, so I'm going to try to get the fire going, okay?
Thank you.
So the first is, for your 3 organizations, what percentage of your users are using encrypted email now?
Well, Marcus only does crypto, so anything that happens on Marcus is crypto.
Yeah, but I mean, if I look up your PGP key, will I find it?
Yeah. Actually, one of the things that we have moved, you need to, the American expression is something like walk the talk. I think it's very important that we do that.
Great.
So one of the things that we have been doing over the last month is try to go to the painful road and move to our PC, which makes our phone calls instead of 30 minutes being an hour and 15. But it's something that we have to do.
And same for you guys?
Yeah, I mean, we have all of our board members and staff members have their PGP keys posted online, our websites, HTTPS by default. We try to lead by example as well, because we're the ones out there preaching about all this stuff. For the best media organization, I think if you look to the Intercept, our former CTO is central to their security now, and he has listed all their PGP keys. They have their secure drop on their contact page. They are HTTPS by default. They run their own Java server. They run their own email server instead of farming it out to Gmail, again, third-party providers. And so hopefully, it's our goal to actually move these media companies into doing this stuff more. You know, it's not just about secure drop, but it's about, you know, protecting the privacy of your readers. It's about making sure that your reporters have a uniform way of communicating. Unfortunately, we haven't seen any other media organizations really adopt these things wholesale, but I'm hopeful.
Yeah, same for CPJ.
Yeah, I would say that I'm happy to report that we're actively in the process of doing a sort of comprehensive review of our security practices.
So the second part of the quick question was, how many of you people here have security now? Security. Encrypted.
Encryption.
Yeah, okay. So the problem I've encountered with organizations, and you guys are all encountering it, is it's really hard to get them to do this. So I work with organizations that have both reporters and are protecting reporters. They don't have secure encrypted email. How do you do it? How do you get over that barrier?
So I'm kind of like a mountain manager. So I would say that if you're working on human rights work, on journalism, you have the responsibility to protect, you have the responsibility to do no harm. And today we know that one of the things that you can do is rely on open source from crypto. So if you're not using it, you're not living up to the standard that you're supposed to be. That would be kind of like my very dogmatic view.
When you're talking about media organizations, the skill level and the awareness level varies widely. I mean, I heard the other day that there was a major news organization that outright refused to install PGP for their reporters. One reporter actually left this organization probably for this reason, because he had a bunch of national security sources that he couldn't talk to, and he couldn't get the technical help he needed to talk to them. But I think the good news is that in the past 6 months, they've actually realized that this is a problem. It's not that most of them aren't actively ignoring it anymore. They just don't know what they have to do. And it's also a larger problem for them. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution. You know, they have a variety of different threats. You know, their national security reporters face threats from the U.S. government subpoenaing them, but their foreign reporters face, you know, foreign governments hacking them. Trying to get in, or you know, Chinese hackers trying to get into their corporate network, and so they have all sorts of things to take into account when they decide whether to implement something organization-wide. That's why I actually have sympathy for them when some of them switch over to Gmail, because it's a small sliver of their sources that are losing their rights when it comes to U.S. subpoenas, but it's also protecting them organization-wide in a better way than they could possibly do against Chinese hackers. So, you know, security is hard.
I would just add, we were sort of musing earlier before the panel about whether it's freelancers or major institutional media organizations that are more actively engaged in these things. I often wonder whether it's veteran reporters. I've talked to some of them who said, well, this is not that different from when I was reporting abroad in X. So I'm just thinking about I'm used to thinking about these things. Or if it's the cub reporters who are more familiar with technology. I would say that to the extent that there is a feeling of privilege or remove, you know, I think a large organization might feel that. We lawyers by training sometimes feel that, like we're, you know, not going to be targeted. That should just be thrown out the window. We've seen incredible aggression toward the press from this administration, and I don't think that that's going to change anytime soon.
We have time for one last question, but before we tackle that, I would like us to think, I mean, even if we don't have time to think of, you know, what are the bits of technology that are missing, what are the problems that are unsolved, the needs that are unmet, and if you can think of them, and we have a few seconds after the next question, throw them over here, or just engage with the guys after the panel.
Yeah, so my question is more for Trevor. I wanted to know how you're scaling secure drop globally, if you are, because many journalists in the world aren't associated with a news organization that may be able to install it. Are you going to work with bloggers? Are you going to offer in different languages? Like, what's sort of the scale that you envision for secure drop?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would love to scale it as much as possible. I mean, the problem we have right now is purely we just don't have enough manpower. We have, you know, one person, James Dolan, who was one of the original developers on this project, who's working on it full-time, who's going to the journalism organizations to help them install it. He's troubleshooting with people if we can't actually physically go there. You can email us and we'll try to answer questions. We're also trying to make the installation process much easier. It's already gone a long way from where it was 8 or 10 months ago, where there was a security audit done by Bruce Schneier and some University of Washington researchers, which basically said that they couldn't install it. And so we have really tried to make the documentation online a lot better. It's still a complicated process right now, but it's doable if you have technical skill. The installation process is definitely the hardest part of it all. We are currently also looking for funding so we can hire 2 or 3 more people to work on this project full time, so we can actually go internationally and help organizations in different countries install Secure Drop. Basically, the only reason that we focus on the U.S. is because it's this is where we're based, and it's easy for us to reach. And so if the quicker we can expand, the better, and that's what we hope to do over this year.
If I could make one very brief point, as with Secure Drop, really the installation or the opportunity cost, getting people over that hump to actually get them to use these tools is often the issue. People can use these tools, it's a matter of getting people to install them, getting them to start using them, and as you said, there are many gateways to digital security.
So I think that we should end this because we're past time. I want to, of course, thank you and thank you both. I mean, if you guys are thinking of doing anything related to journalism, or if you have any questions, you should approach them during this day. And if you have any other questions that may be relevant for the rest of the techno activist community, or in particular ideas about what needs to be solved, what needs to be fixed, there's a bunch of us around that would be very happy to hear what you have to say. So thank you everyone for waking up so early.